Want to give a quick shout out to all of my patrons. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. And I am done. Okay, so I just finished up reading The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. This is the first book in the Dandelion Dynasty quartet, and I want to give you my unedited thoughts upon finishing this book, which was just right now. So, oh my gosh, this book is incredible. I honestly don't think that I've read a book this good since I finished up reading Malazan, which would mean this is my second favorite book that I've ever read. And I recently said that about Lonesome Dove, but I enjoyed my experience here more than I liked that. So I'm gonna go ahead and say this is my second favorite book that I've ever read in my life. It's crazy good. It's everything that I would ever want in a fantasy book. It's just every single component here feels like it works. And like, have you ever read a book before where you felt like it was written just for your particular tastes? That's what I feel like Ken Liu did for me. I honestly feel like he did like this character study into what Matt wants out of his books, and then he went and wrote that book. That's how perfect it is to me. It's just mind-blowing. I read this book as a Patreon pick, and I'm so glad that this book got picked. And I was kind of leery going into it because I don't try to be a contrarian. I try to just give my honest opinion on the books that I read. But that comes off contrarian sometimes because my views end up sometimes very different than the popular opinion on what things should be. Because I kind of insulate myself from what people are saying, or I try to. And then when I read, even if I know that a book's hyped up, I don't fall for that hype. Or I don't fall for the other side of it. If a book's kind of, people are talking down on it, I don't try to go in with preconceived notions. But I went into this one with a bit of a preconceived notion that this is the darling. It's got a lot of things going for it that worry me as a reader. I see these books win all these kinds of awards. I see a bunch of booktubers going over the top in their praise. Some booktubers that, not saying any names here, but some booktubers that I find are overly positive in the way that they review books. And so I went into this thinking, man, I'm going to get hit with another poppy war, this Asian-inspired book that is way bigger than, life, and I'm going to end up being really down on it. But I kept reading this book, and very quickly I was just enamored with the story. I was sucked in within the first chapter. And as the book went along, it got better and better throughout. This is a book. If you don't know what this is about, this is a political upheaval and that tears up this mythical country. It starts off with this emperor in charge of a very fractured world that's here. And very quickly there is civil war and tons of different people are taking over different countries here and trying to vie for being the emperor of all the land. And it is a non-stop a Game of Thrones, if you will. And, and I say Game of Thrones very intentionally because, when I read A Song of Ice and Fire, and it will forever go down as one of my favorite series of all time, whether the final two books come out or not, and they're not. And my favorite parts of that were the political aspects to it. Now, I work in politics, so I am a sucker for that kind of stuff. And I love it when people nail political machinations to a very high level. And in Game of Thrones, that happens. You have multiple people taking over the Iron Throne. Hope that doesn't spoil anything for you, but it's kind of part of the name of the story here in the first book. And this book takes that, and I'm not even joking you, it multiplies it by 10. That's all the book is people taking over, people on a decline, things getting taken over here, plots coming out to take out this person and this person getting taken out, and now war over here and war over here. It never lets go. Now, it feels like too much at times, but this isn't a made-up story. This is a fantasy look at real events that happened in China. I think it's the Han Dynasty. Now, I don't know much at all about the Han Dynasty, and I might even be saying that name wrong. It could be something else, but I think it's Han. But this is an aspect of history that I know nothing about. I am well familiar with Chinese history from, about, 1900 to present. And that kind of hurt things when I read The Poppy War, because I knew the story already. That one is a story that very much mimics early 1900s Chinese history, and it ruined a lot of the tension for me. So maybe that's the case if people are really familiar with this story already. It's going to say, oh, I know all the basic things that are happening. But for me, I knew nothing, so it felt fresh to me and perfect. And so I said multiple times when I'm reading this, it's like, this could never happen. This is so, so many different things are happening, and how could this all end up being true? But oftentimes, truth is stranger than fiction, and that's the case here. And it's perfect. Now, when I say perfect, it's clearly not going to be perfect with most readers. And maybe even smaller than that. Maybe it's perfect for a very, very small percentage of readers. This book on Goodreads is not very high rated. I think when I last checked, it was in the 3.75 range, which isn't horrible, but for mainstream fantasy books, you would expect this to be rated way higher. And so I think the average person that reads this is going to find a lot of things about it that they don't enjoy. Now, they worked for me, but the pace of this book is frantically fast. And it skips over events to tell a lot of story within this one book. I'm not even joking you. It's like the entire A Song of Ice and Fire, with all of the political things that happened into it, times 5, wrapped up into one rather large book. I think it's 700 or 800 pages. I read on Kindle, so I have no idea the page length. And they come with locations and stuff, so I don't know what it is. But it's crazy how much happens here. And what you sacrifice in able to tell that story is the downtime. In a more modern, normal, mainstream fantasy book, what you're going to find is when, one group is battling another group and they hatch a plan, and now we're going to spend a few chapters fleshing that out. We're going to go from point A to point B. We're going to talk about all the things that went into that plan and getting it, enacted. And then 3 or 4 chapters later, at the soonest, you're going to see that plan into action. In this book, you will hear a plan, and then by the next page, you're going to see that plan into action. And a few pages after that, you're going to see the aftermath of that. You don't get any downtime. And you're going to find a lot of readers that are not going to appreciate what was done here. Now, for me, it's perfect. It wouldn't be perfect, I think, if everybody did this. I'd want something a little bit different. But the fact that nobody does this, nobody that I know, it made it feel so fresh. I couldn't wait to read what happened next. More than almost any book that I've ever read. I just could not stop reading this. I was addicted to it because I knew that when I picked it up, even if I was only going to read for 15 minutes, major events were going to happen that will change the political landscape of this entire world in 15 pages. If I sat down to read 100 pages, which is a very long reading session for me, the entire scope of what was happening would be changing. Now, that's not to say that we don't get close character, development here. You do. There is very strong characters in this book. And because you're jumping through, 3 to 4 kind of more main characters, there's a lot more POVs than that. But those 3 or 4 get a lot of development. They change significantly from the first page to the last. And you get to know them intimately well. But you're not going to hear all these little side conversations that you would see in a lot of books. You're not going to get these moments of, let's go journey on horses and talk about our lives between here and there. None of that. You're going to get these moments in action sequences, and their planning, and negotiation type things. Gosh, it's good. And this is the first book of 4. And that's crazy to me because this story wraps up. You could very much read this book as a standalone and never pick up another book in this series and feel like you understood the whole story. I have no idea where this story is going to go at all. It felt like a standalone. And maybe that made it a little bit better. There's no cliffhanger here at all. You get an ending. I'm not going to tell you what the ending is. I'm not even going to get close to telling you what the ending is. But you're going to get a legitimate ending here that feels like we finished off what's happening. Now, this is labeled a fantasy book. And everything that I've told you makes it feel like a history book. And it reads a little bit like a history book at times. It's a little more dry than you're going to find in some other works. But there are major fantasy elements here. In the whole backdrop, you've got this kind of like ancient Greek kind of thing going on here, where you have the gods talking about events that are happening. Every large set of pages, it doesn't happen a lot, maybe 10 in this whole book, maybe a little more. You'll have this set of gods who are chatting it up. They have their favorite hero on land. You can see that they're playing a part behind the scenes to kind of nudge them ahead. They're, at odds with their siblings and the chosen hero of their siblings. It's a really fun aspect of these books. But that's not the only fantasy things here. You've got characters doing deeds that are not normal. You've got this one hero that's 8 feet tall that basically can't be stopped unless he was just, thousands of people would have rushed into him. But he's, destroying dozens of people, at a time. You've got giant sea beasts. You've got some interesting technological things that should not exist back then. And I don't want to ruin what this is, but, one example that you'll see right in the first chapter is you have like sky ships that are like kind of like blimps, but they're not, the technology is different. But it's way more advanced than you would see in like ancient China, or not ancient, but you know what I'm talking about. Back to like, 1,000, 2,000 years ago. I feel like that's when the Han thing happened. I could be wrong, and I don't think that's technically ancient. But what do I know? But yeah, there's very I don't want to say like heavy fantasy here, but there is a healthy dose of fantasy that goes into this, and it's welcomed. I find that it makes the story greater. I talked about the characters. I thought the characters were extremely well done. There is very strong women characters in this, which is interesting because you have to assume that in an ancient history type book that the women would play virtually no part. That they would be totally sidelined due to sexism. And while there is heavy sexism in this culture, you see that the women are coming out. And I'd say like one theme of this book is that women play an important part in the world and they should be utilized more. And that's shown here. It's shown very strongly. And, I think that the plot here is the greatest part of the book. The plot is just incredible. These moments are happening and everything that happens makes sense. You see the horrible impacts that somebody's leadership style could happen, and then you see the trickle-down effect of what you kind of would assume might happen in a much more entertaining way than I think that you or me or pretty much anybody but Ken Liu could really piece it all together to make it make sense. I said it's dry. It's dry in the sense that we're going from event to event to event. But the prose itself is amazing. Ken Liu is an incredible writer, and it really comes off here. The words just gush out, and it's extremely well done. This could come off more in that history book, very dry, very boring. And I say that with a lot of love because I love to read history books. I don't really anymore, but I did have a large phase of my life where that's really what I read. And so I do have a deep love for those, but they are, a bit more on the boring side. You have to be really into it to find the enjoyment there. Not so here. Just if you want to go into it just for writing quality alone, you're going to get a huge payoff here. The fun is off the charts. Everything that I'd want is here. So I cannot wait to continue my journey with the Dandelion Dynasty. I have no idea how it's going to go, but I cannot wait. Thank you so much to my Patreon for picking this book for me. But I'm not going to go out and close out this video and say, go buy this book. You have to be kind of interested in what I'm saying here, and what might interest you, because this is most definitely not for everybody, but I am so glad that it is for me, because I've been reading a lot of books lately that have been subpar. And this is my worst start to a reading year that I could ever remember. I've given very few 5 stars. But we're back on track, baby. We are back on track. This is the best book that I've read in years, and I can't wait to see what the rest of 2023 has in store for me, and the fact that I still get to read 3 more books from this incredible, incredible author. So, thank you so much for watching, and as always, happy reading to you. Thanks again to all of my patrons, with a special shout out to my Ascendant tier patrons, Sky, Russell, Ron Reich, Romeo Mike, CJ, My Book is Lit, and Jamie.